Chapter 22 of The Trevor Case. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. The Trevor Case by Natalie Sumner Lincoln. Chapter 22. At the Time Appointed. Dick leaned limply against the high glass counter, his cold fingers holding fast to the telltale chain. "Mr. Tillinghast!" He whirled around and found Hardy standing by his side. "I tried to see you at your office, but Colonel Byrd said you were at Stoneleigh Court. On going there, Mr. Blake's servant told me I might catch you here. Chief Connor has received word that Clark was arrested this morning in New York on board an outgoing tramp steamer. He was disguised as an Italian stoker. 2 Secret Service men are bringing him back on the 6:10 train tonight. Chief Connor sent me word to look you up at once, as he—" "Just a moment, Hardy," Dick interrupted. He had done some rapid thinking, and a daring plan had occurred to him, which he decided to put into instant execution. "Are you a good bluffer?" "You bet. Try me." "Then go to the head clerk and tell him you need this chain," picking it up, "as a piece of evidence in a murder. Do that, then come with me, and by night you will have the real murderer of Mrs. Trevor under lock and key. Be quick." Hardy did exactly as Dick suggested, meeting with but little opposition from the head clerk after he had convinced that individual that he was a properly accredited representative of the law. "Come on, Tom," called Dick, as his friend stopped for a moment to examine a tray filled with cigarette cases. "What's up?" he inquired, joining the 2 men at the door. "Another clue," answered Dick briefly. "In with you both," bundling them unceremoniously into the waiting motor. "I want half an hour's uninterrupted talk with you and Hardy, Tom." Tom looked keenly at Dick's serious face. "Drive me to the mall," he ordered, and the chauffeur started slowly off in that direction. "Out with your story, Dick." The latter took the broken link out of his pocket and handed it to Tom. "I found this link in the Trevor house under the armor in the front hall. No member of that household can identify it. Wilkins, their butler, declares it was not there on the morning of the murder, as he and the footman oiled the floor then. Clark, according to the butler, wears a fob. Swarms of people called and left cards at the Trevors, but they go no further than the front door. I am telling you all this to prove that the broken link was not where I found it before the murder, nor could it have been dropped there after the finding of the body. Now, that broken link is exactly the same design and fits in this chain which Hardy has just received from the clerk at Galt's." "Well, what then?" demanded Hardy, eagerly. "Just this." Dick spoke slowly and distinctly so as to be heard by the deeply interested men. "This chain belongs to Count de Morny." "Hold on," exclaimed Tom, recovering from his surprise. "Perhaps some person attending the inquest dropped it. That part of the house was roped off and guarded by policemen." "You are right," agreed Hardy. "I remember the careful arrangements we made to keep the crowd to the left as they entered the house. Besides," examining the chain closely, "it must have taken a tremendous wrench to break off that link, and the few pieces of furniture on the way to the library and parlor were moved to make room for the people passing back and forth." "Exactly," said Dick. "My theory is that De Morny, after committing the murder, concealed himself behind the armor in the corner by the chimney. In getting up, his chain must have caught and wrenched off the link." "But the motive?" demanded Hardy. "Count de Morny is a member of the diplomatic corps. There will be an awful howl and international complications unless we have absolute proof of his guilt before we arrest him. Mr. Blake can tell you that Mrs. Trevor and the Count hated each other." "Yes, he told me so," corroborated Tom, as the detective looked at him. "I also overheard the Count threaten her." "Gordon was not the only man late in arriving at the bachelor's cotillion that night," went on Dick. "De Morney never got there until after midnight. He gave very evasive answers to Miss McAllister when she asked what had detained him. We all teased him about his unusual solemnity. And then, towards the end of the ball, he astonished us by sudden outbursts of hilarity. At the time I attributed them to too many convivial glasses of champagne, but a more sinister cause may have been responsible for his conduct. To sum up, we know De Morney hated Mrs. Trevor. We know he threatened her. We know this chain belongs to him. We know one link from it was found in the Trevors' house. We know he could have killed Mrs. Trevor that night, and have gone afterwards to the ball. It is what Gordon is accused of doing. Now, I propose we go to De Morney and demand an explanation. If he cannot give a satisfactory one, Hardy here, as a representative of the law, can threaten to arrest him." "I can," Hardy looked troubled, "but you gentlemen have got to stand by me, for I may get into a devil of a row by exceeding my authority." "Don't worry," said Tom. "I am convinced De Morney is the murderer, and that our bluff will work." "I must speak to Captain Brown first, sir," objected the detective. Tom wasted no time in words. He leaned across and spoke to his chauffeur. "Police headquarters," he ordered. "As fast as you can get there." About an hour later the big car purred softly up K Street and stopped before a modest red brick house. Tom led the way up the short flagged walk and rang the bell. A Union Transfer baggage wagon drove up to the curb, and Hardy nodded toward it, whispering to Dick, "Make a quick getaway." "Take my card to Monsieur de Comte," said Tom to the attendant who answered the door. "I will detain him but a moment." His air of authority had its effect on the servant, and he promptly showed them into the small parlor, saying he would summon his master. Too nervous to sit down, Dick wandered around the cozy room, looking at first one ornament and then another. The place spoke of wealth and good taste. A Corot and a Millet hung on the walls. The rich coloring of the Oriental hangings and rugs gave out an air of comfort and warmth, which was added to by the cannel coal fire burning cheerfully in the grate. It had grown bitterly cold outside, and the men, grateful for the warmth, stood grouped about the fireplace as Count de Morney entered. "Ah, Monsieur Blake! Most welcome. And you too, monsieur," shaking Dick warmly by the hand, "and," looking at the detective, "Detective Hardy," supplemented Tom, feeling exceedingly uncomfortable, but the Frenchman apparently did not notice the air of constraint in each man's attitude, but greeted Hardy with all the courtesy of his nation. "Won't you seat?" he asked, pulling the lounging chairs nearer the fire. "It is cold outside, n'est-ce pas?" "Thanks. We have only come for a moment," answered Dick. "Just to ask you—" He hesitated, glancing at Hardy. "To ask you," said Hardy, stepping forward, "what took place between you and Mrs. Trevor on the night of Wednesday, February 3rd?" A look of blank astonishment crossed De Morney's face. "Ze night of ze 3rd!" he exclaimed. "But I do not see Madame Zen. I do not remember. One moment." As he spoke, he drew a small morocco-bound memorandum book from his vest pocket and rapidly turned its leaves. "Mais oui, I was at ze bachelor's that night," he added triumphantly. "You did not go there until after midnight," said Dick. "Oui, monsieur," said De Morney. He eyed the men sharply. It just occurred to him that their behavior was somewhat peculiar. "And what then?" haughtily. We wish to know where you were between the hours of 10 o'clock and 1 in the morning on the night of the 3rd. Why should you question me, Monsieur Hardy? Turning squarely on the detective. Because I want to know when you killed Mrs. Trevor, he bluntly replied. The detective's meaning dawned slowly upon De Morney's mind. Then he leaped to his feet with an oath, his handsome eyes flashing with fury. Pardieu! He cried. You dare! You dare! Not able to express his indignation in his limited English, he burst into French. Tom tried to stem the torrent of his words by addressing him in his native tongue, while Dick and Hardy stood hopelessly looking on, but De Morney would not be appeased. I he began lapsing into broken English. I, a De Morney, am accused by a pig of an American of a crime so foul? Bah! Then, mastering his rage by a great effort, he asked more calmly, May I ask Monsieur for his reasons of a charge so monstrous? Certainly, said Hardy. You were heard to threaten her. I, Monsieur? In great astonishment. Yes, I overheard you do so at Mrs. McAllister's, interrupted Tom. De Morney looked at him with an enigmatic smile. So, was his only comment. You cannot give a satisfactory account of your whereabouts on February 3rd between the hours of 10 and 1 in the morning. At least you haven't yet. So? Again the Frenchman smiled. Now, Count. Hardy spoke slowly to make sure that De Morney understood him. We have irrefutable evidence that you were in the Trevor house on that night. A piece of your property was found there. What is it? questioned De Morney with a rising inflection. This, taking the watch chain out of his pocket. Mais c'est impossible, ejaculated the Frenchman. I myself sent the chain to the jeweler to be mended. Exactly, Count, to be mended. Here is the broken link you lost in the Trevor house on the night of February 3rd. Spellbound, De Morney gazed at the coin lying in Hardy's broad palm. Then he reached over, took up the watch chain, laid it on the bare mahogany table, and fitted the broken link into place. In silence the three men watched him, as a cat watches a mouse, but they could learn nothing of the passion burning within him from his set face and brooding eyes. Finally he broke the long pause to ask, And you think? That the owner of that chain is the murderer of Mrs. Trevor. You are right, sir, said a low, clear voice back of the detective. I am he. With a convulsive bound, Hardy swung round, Dick and Tom being too petrified to move. Ah, no, no, de Smirnoff, say not so, cried De Morney, deep feeling in his shaking voice. The Russian had entered unnoticed some minutes before by a door communicating with an inner room. Too shocked for speech, and sick at heart, Dick gazed at him. This was the man who had saved him from a horrible death, and he had repaid the debt by hounding him to the gallows. But for his intervention, the criminal would have gone undetected. And why not, Henri? asked de Smirnoff quietly. I cannot have you, mon ami, arrested for my crime. And so, monsieur, to Hardy, you found my lucky piece and traced it here. I do not know how you did it, but it was clever work. I thought I had covered my tracks. Hold, sir, said Hardy, his sense of fair play causing him to interrupt. I must warn you that everything you say will be used against you. De Smirnoff shrugged his shoulders. It can make no difference. Then, as Hardy pulled out a pair of handcuffs, his face flushed hotly. Not that! My God, not that! I will come quietly with you." At a sign from Dick, Hardy reluctantly put them back in his pocket. "My warm thanks, monsieur," said de Smirnoff slowly, "for the great kindness. And I have another favor to ask of you. My host, Count de Morny, knows nothing of this affair. I would like, if possible, to explain my share in it to him and to you. It was so sordid murder. Will you not sit a moment?" Dick held a whispered conversation with Tom and Hardy, and then turned to de Smirnoff. "We agree to listen, Count." De Smirnoff bowed his head in grave acknowledgment, and then signed to the men to draw up their chairs. It was a scene Dick never forgot. The room lighted only by the winter twilight and the bright blaze of the cannel coal, the 5 men seated in a circle around the hearth, the firelight flickering on their excited faces. De Smirnoff was by far the calmest of them all. "It will not take long in the telling," he began. "But to make the present situation clear, I must speak first of the past. Hélène de Beaupré's mother, Olga Woletsky, was a Russian. She married Claude de Beaupré, and they lived first in one country and then in another, finally returning to St. Petersburg. There they lived in comparative poverty and obscurity, having spent most of their patrimony in their wanderings about the world. About 5 years later they both died within a very short time of each other, leaving their only child, a girl of 23, in the care of an uncle, Colonel Woletsky. I saw her often before the death of her parents. She was very beautiful then, the beauty of the devil, the beauty that destroys men's souls. My only son, Sasha de Smirnoff, met her frequently at a friend's house, and fell madly in love with her. She returned his passion, but she would not consent to a marriage ceremony being performed, as she said she did not believe in the solemn rites of the Church. I think she simply did not wish to bind herself legally to one man. They lived together for 2 years. He paused, then resumed his story. "While this was going on, I was in Persia looking after some mining interests, which I inherited from an uncle. News travels but slowly in that country of no telegraphs, telephones, or railroads, and during those 2 years and more I heard but seldom from Sasha. Therefore you can understand my horror and my agony when, on my return to St. Petersburg, I found that my son had been arrested as a nihilist, secretly tried, and sent God knows where." His voice shook with feeling. "Hélène had also vanished. I joined the secret police as a political spy. For nearly 4 despairing years I searched Siberia for my boy, visiting every penal settlement in that vast land. There is no need of recounting the humiliation and suffering I endured during that time, the worst agony being my anxiety for my son. Finally, I found him in the worst settlement of all, broken in health and in spirit, a physical and almost mental wreck. Remembering him as I did in the glory of his young manhood, tall, handsome, brave, it was a fearful shock to me to find him crippled, scarred, and cringing. Shortly after my arrival, Sasha fell ill with brain fever, and for days I nursed him, fearing he would never recover. He rallied finally, and slowly, day by day, regained his strength. I did everything I could to lighten his confinement, while all the time planning his escape. One day a fresh batch of political prisoners arrived, among them an old friend of Sasha's. When he found who I was, he told me that he himself, after Sasha's arrest, had gone to Hélène and given her proofs of Sasha's innocence of the crime he was charged with, thinking that of course she would use the papers to clear him. But the vampire was already tired of Sasha. She disappeared with the papers, believing that safe in the wilds of Siberia Sasha would never trouble her again, and she could live her own life untroubled by the past. Boris advised me to recover those papers, give them to the proper authorities, and secure my son's release. It seemed the only thing to do, as Sasha's health was such that to try and escape in the rigors of that climate was courting certain death. Therefore I left Siberia, first arranging with one of the Cossack officials at the settlement to send me word every month of my son's physical condition, care of my Paris bankers. He stopped and sighed deeply, then drew out his cigar case. "Will you not join me? I speak more calmly when I smoke." "I will not weary you with a detailed account of my search for Hélène. My connection with the secret police helped me, and I was of great use to the Bureau, as few suspected that I belonged to the force. Finally I traced Hélène to Italy, Paris, England, and then here. I knew of the Grand Duke's proposed visit, and asked permission to accompany him, and I was sent on as special agent to guard him against the Camorra, as you already know," to Dick. "I came on to Washington before the Grand Duke, however, and meeting Henri," placing his hand affectionately on De Morney's shoulder, "an old friend of Sasha's, accepted his invitation to visit him during my stay here. That was on the 2nd of February. On Wednesday morning, as I was going out of the front door, I was astounded to see Hélène sitting in her automobile by the curb. I believe her chauffeur was in the vestibule waiting to deliver a note. I paid no attention to him, but went straight to the limousine and opened the door. I have altered little, and Hélène knew me at once. She shrank back in her seat. "You have nothing to fear," I said quickly. "I simply want those papers which will clear Sasha. Have you kept them?" My one terror had been that she might have destroyed them, and my heart leaped with joy when she told me she had the papers, but she also said she had no intention of giving them up. "I am not here to haggle with you," I answered. "What is your price?" "20,000. "Rubles?" "No, dollars." Her ruling passion was gambling. It was an inherited vice. She would sell her soul for money to lose over the gaming tables. "It is so," interrupted De Morney. "I was warning her, Monsieur Blake, when you overheard me. She was my cousin, but yes, and I did not want her name disgraced. I hated and despised her for her treatment of my friend Sasha, and it was I, messieurs, who first notified Count de Smirnoff that she was in Washington." The Frenchman's eyes sparkled vindictively. "Hélène leaned back in her car, thinking, continued de Smirnoff. "Finally she said, speaking low that the chauffeur should not hear, 'Come to my house tonight at 1 o'clock. I can see you alone then. The others will be at the ball. Knock very softly on the front door.' I nodded understandingly, saying, 'I will bring the money. Do not fail me,' and closed the door of the car as the chauffeur cranked the engine. The rest of the day was taken up with arranging my affairs. I produced my letters of credit and drew out the money without difficulty from different banks until I had the requisite amount. It was a quarter of my fortune, but no sum was too great to spend in rescuing my son from his living death. After helping me, Henri went to Baltimore on business connected with his embassy—" "Oui, I did," again interrupted De Morney, "and I only return by ze midnight train." "I was sitting here by the fire about 8 o'clock," went on de Smirnoff, "thinking and planning for the future, the happy future, when Sasha and I could go to sunny Italy, and in that ideal climate he would regain his shattered health. We would take a villa on Lake Como. Just then the housekeeper brought in a cablegram. I tore it open. My son was dead. In letters of fire the message burned into my brain. How long I sat there I do not know, but when I rose my soul was frozen, my mind made up. She who was blood guilty should answer for her crime. I would keep my appointment, get the letters, and forward them to Russia, thus making certain that Sasha should sleep in no unhallowed grave, but he brought to the old vault in St. Petersburg to rest at last with honor, unblemished by the side of his illustrious ancestors. At the time appointed, I was in the Trevors' vestibule, and I tapped softly on the door. In a few minutes Hélène admitted me, and we tiptoed softly into what was apparently a private office. The light was on, and I glanced about the room to see if we were alone. The open safe attracted my attention. Hélène noticed my glance in that direction. "My papers are there with my jewelry. I had to get the combination before I could see you. Have the money?" I nodded. She went to the safe and picked up a small bundle. As I watched her, my hand closed over a hatpin lying on the top of the desk I was standing by. I glanced down at it. The long, sharp-pointed steel caught my attention. It was an ideal weapon for my purpose, far better than a revolver shot which might arouse the household. As it happened, the pin broke in the wound. There was not a trace of feeling in his voice. Hélène returned, and in silence I handed the money to her and watched her count it. Beautiful as ever, living in the lap of luxury, while he, Sasha, her devoted lover always, had experienced the drags of life in that hell upon earth. Merciful God, could such things be? In silence she handed me the papers. In silence I took them. She was about to speak when her eye caught the glitter of a ring on the floor. She dropped on one knee to pick it up, resting her left hand against my thigh to balance herself. Quickly I seized my chance, and with one strong, straight stroke drove the hatpin into her heart, putting out my left hand to catch and steady her body. And I held her until her head fell back, and I saw her eyes glazing. Thus died Hélène, the vampire. No one spoke. In the terrible silence the ticking of the small clock sounded clear and distinct. De Smirnoff roused himself. "My tale is soon finished. I carried the body to the safe and fastened the door. But first I put the $20,000 gold certificates, wrapped in her handkerchief, by her side. She had paid the price. I had no further use for the money." A gasp came from Hardy. "Good God! Clark must have stolen the money," he cried. "He found the handkerchief." "What matter?" said De Smirnoff indifferently. "It is blood money, ill-gotten gains. To continue, I put out the lights in the room and went into the hall, but just as I started for the door I heard someone coming downstairs, so I hid behind a suit of old armor. The man, whom I judged to be Mr. Trevor, went straight to the front door and admitted a woman. They went immediately into the room I had just left. Just as I started to go, Mr. Trevor returned into the hall and went upstairs. He came down at once, and in a few seconds I heard him talking on the telephone. This was my opportunity. I rose up hurriedly, but in my haste I caught my watch chain in some sharp part of the iron stand which supported the armor. I heard something snap, but dared not stop to investigate. I slipped out of the front door and down the front steps as noiselessly as I could, but dropped the head of the hatpin in opening the door. With a supreme effort I took up my everyday life the next morning, attending to my duties in safeguarding the person of the Grand Duke, and accepting the invitations I received as Henri's guest. It has given me infinite satisfaction to see Hélène's wicked past revealed gradually to the world she had fooled so long. Monsieur Tillinghast," he turned directly to Dick, "I am glad I was of service to you the other night, for you remind me of Sasha." His voice quivered on his son's name. Count, what can I say?" faltered Dick. "Say nothing. It is Kismet. In my grief for my son I have never given the loss of my lucky coin another thought. But I hated to be without my chain, a present from Sasha, when a lad. So I asked Henri to send it to a jeweler to be mended. That is all, I think, messieurs." For some time his voice had grown husky from weariness and emotion. Now he could hardly articulate. None of his listeners cared to break the painful pause. Suddenly Hardy, the most callous of the four men, rose and turned on the lights. As he did so a cry escaped De Mornay. "Look! Look!" he shouted, pointing to De Smirnoff. With a bound Dick was by the Russian's side, his hand on his heart. De Smirnoff's head was thrown back, his body, unnoticed in the dimly lighted room, had twisted slightly, and his eyes were fixed in a dreadful stare. There was no need for Dick to speak. Each man in the room knew De Smirnoff was dead. Tom leaned over and took the half-burnt cigar from the nerveless fingers. "The poison was here," he said. Dick's pitying gaze fell on the livid face. "Better so," he said softly. Chapter 22